All right, so let's get started on today's class. So I'd like to welcome everybody to Cognitive Psychology. What we're going to be doing today is just kind of easing into this course. This is going to be your intro to this course so that you know what you can expect, what's going to be coming down for this semester, and just kind of give you the tools to know what's coming up and how you can navigate best your learning experience. So for the intro today, we're going to cover a few things. First off, I'll introduce myself. So some of you I've had in previous classes. For others, this will be your first time in one of my classes. So we'll go through how to pronounce my name, the research projects that I work on in cognitive psychology, and then also the Stigma-free initiative that I'm part of. And then we're going to have a cognitive warm-up. We're going to shake off some of the dust that might have accumulated on some of our cognitive mechanisms over this winter break, just to make sure that we're ready to go, and also illustrate some of the things that we're going to be encountering this semester. We're then going to do take a look at a course overview, take a look at the course procedure, and we'll finish it up with some syllabus highlights, so once again you know exactly what to expect for this coming semester. Alright, let's start off with the name. So my name is Dr. Juricevic. And while that might seem like a mouthful and hard to say, when you take a look at it in one piece, like many of the things that you learn in psychology, a lot easier if you break it down into its component parts. So it starts off with a U, and then there's a reach, and then you open up and say ah, and then finally it ends with a veach. And if you're a math minor, you might recognize that gray triangle as a veach. So it's U reach a veach. So let's all try that on 3. 1, 2, 3. All right, that's nice. I usually make my class repeat it, but I don't think we need to in this instance. Okay, so it's U reach a veach. So this is going to be a very helpful slide. If during this course, if you have any questions during any of the material, put your hand up. Excuse me, Dr. Juricevic. Could you go through that again, Dr. Juricevic? I didn't quite understand that last theory. Or if you have any insights, Dr. Juricevic, I just saw this news program that said your mind works like this. Is that the case? Dr. Juricevic, I just saw this movie that says that your mind works like this. Is that the case? If it's a movie, probably no. But anyways, if you have any insights, any questions, anything that you want extra explanation on, feel free, just raise your hand, refer to this slide, and we'll make sure that everybody gets the experience that you need to make sense of how does our mind work. Speaking of how our mind works, I do research in cognitive psychology. So that's the area of research that I work in. And specifically, most recently, I've worked on projects that delve into visual language. So we're going to touch on language in this course. And much like we have a verbal language and a written language that we can understand, there's a visual language that we as humans also can understand. And I do work on trying to understand how do people communicate using images, using visuals. And my work, because of its nature, has actually found a great resource in comic book images. So most of my work is done by analyzing and studying different comic book images for what they can tell us about how our minds actually work. So this idea of a visual language, just to kind of give you an example of what this actually means. If you have a language, then you have a grammar. You have some sort of structure to that language. And if you start taking a look at the way that we communicate using images, you will see that images have a certain grammar of their own. So here we have an image from an artist for the cover of Daredevil, and this was drawn by one artist, and then we have another cover, and it was drawn by a completely different artist. But notice that both pictures share the same grammar. They're using the same structure. So for example, in both pictures, the villain is drawn rather large. It's drawn using exaggerated size. That is part of our visual language. That communicates to the reader, to the viewer, that this person is going to be of great importance, that this person is very powerful. That's one of the ways that we can communicate that visually. So both of those share that particular aspect. And then also notice that the hero in both cases is not drawn in the center of the image, but is drawn a little bit asymmetrically, a little bit off to the side. And that is done again by two different artists trying to communicate that these heroes are not quite like us. There's something a little bit different because most things in nature are symmetrical. You take a look at us, we're symmetrical. So making something have asymmetry really makes us feel and understand that this person is a little bit different, a little bit special, not like we are. So that's the idea of a visual language. Some of my work, just to kind of give you an overview of some of the projects that I've done. I've looked at how do we combine information from different sources to understand an image. So when we take a look at this picture of the Flash running, there's literal information in this picture. Things that are depicted that actually happen in the real world when you run. So for example, when you run, your legs and your arms will be in a certain position. That literally happens, and that is literally depicted in this image. Other things though, like these action lines here, do not occur in the real world. It doesn't matter how fast you run, you're not going to have lines start to come out from behind you. So this is metaphorical information here. So we analyzed hundreds of these images that had metaphorical and literal components to it, and what we found was that our mind can process as much literal information as an artist can put in there. It can process multiple sources of literal information, but it only processes one source of metaphorical information. So as soon as you use that one metaphor, like action lines here, adding additional metaphors does nothing to make your image more understandable. It's just not the way that your mind works. And we're actually going to be covering that in this course. So we're going to dedicate a week to perception of images. And we're actually going to take a look at this analysis of metaphors in comic book covers. And that was published in the comic script. We're also going to take a look at attention and why that little pop-up of the toolbar at the bottom I found rather distracting. And I lost my train of thought there for a second. All of the wonders of your mind will be answered in this course. All right, other things. Oh yeah, and a follow-up study was also published in the Journal of Graphic Novels and Comics. Another area of research, another topic that that we're looking into in our lab, has to do with how do you know when something is metaphorical. So for example, if you were talking with somebody and they were telling you about their friend John, and they say, you know what, John's a really nice guy, but John kind of has a heart of stone. You don't interpret that literally. If you interpreted that literally, you would say to yourself, oh my gosh, let's get John to the hospital. Oh my goodness, what is this medical marvel that is living with a stone heart? No, you understand, oh, you mean it metaphorically. John is cold, John is emotionless. I get that, I can understand it. What about in images? How do we understand when an image is meant to be metaphorical or an image is meant to be literal? So we did a study where we took a look at a device that could be used metaphorically or literally, and that was exaggerated size. So here we have a picture from Mockingbird #1 of Mockingbird, and she is depicted in exaggerated size. She is a normal-sized human female, but she is depicted here as being gigantic, and this is meant to be understood metaphorically. This is meant to be understood as she is powerful, she is central to the story, she's highly competent. That's how you're supposed to understand this use of gigantic size. On the other hand, sometimes a giant is a literal giant. So here we have gigantic size, the same structure, the same piece of imagery, but this time it's actually depicting a giant. Galactus is actually the devourer of worlds. He's a gigantic celestial being that literally eats the life force of an entire planet because he's so huge. So how do we understand that Galactus is meant to be interpreted as an actual giant, but Mockingbird is a regular-sized individual who's just metaphorically important and powerful to the story? So we took a look at that, and we saw how information from different sources combines. So how contextual information, the fact that you're looking at a comic book cover, the fact that you might know something about these characters, the fact that you know certain tropes in the comic book world, that contextual information is combined with structural information. The fact that Galactus is a solo figure. The fact that Mockingbird is also portrayed over here. How are those structural elements communicating that it's metaphorical? And we took a look at how they combine, and it's a little complicated to just explain, so I will point you to the publication that we did in the International Journal of Comic Art, showing how those are getting published. And we actually have 2 more manuscripts submitted right now waiting for approval. All right, and the last one that I'll mention in terms of work on visual language. When I popped up this image, most of you probably were easily decoded the metaphor that this individual just had a great idea. So the metaphor of the light bulb above somebody's head indicates that they have just come up with, a great idea. And that's a metaphor that we're very familiar with. And we're familiar with it because it's spread through our visual language. It's spread through the language that we speak in terms of visuals. But somebody had to come up with that the first time. And other people had to look at it and say, that's a great way to do it. I'm going to do it as well, so that it's spread through our visual language. So how does somebody come up with something like that? And then how does it spread? That was another question that we looked into. So to help us do this, we identified a new metaphor called, well, it's not a new metaphor, but we discovered it and labeled it, called close-up eye asymmetry. So this is a metaphor where you, number 1, show the individual in close-up, and then number 2, have some sort of asymmetrical aspect, specifically around their eyes. So it's close-up, eye asymmetry. So an example here at the top, you can see Storm. She's got 2 examples of eye asymmetry. One, her hair is only falling on the one side, so we got asymmetry in that case. But even more convincingly, she's got lightning bolts coming out of her one eye here. And if you know about Storm, you know she's the mistress of the elements. She's got weather powers, but they're not asymmetrical. There's no reason a lightning bolt couldn't be coming out of the other eye, except that this artist wanted to use this metaphor to communicate the idea that she is somewhat different than your typical individual. Same here with Magneto. Powers coming only out of one eye. Same thing here with Harbinger. He's a powerful psychic. Once again, not asymmetrical, but we have asymmetry around the eye. And you can do it with shading. You can do it with other objects, such as a camera or a skull. And then you can even do it with composition. So once again, here we see that visual grammar we talked about earlier. But you can have individuals portrayed on only one side. You can have lightning bolts only on one side. And then Witchblade over here could have been placed anywhere in this image, but she was placed over Lara Croft's eye so that she has that close-up eye asymmetry. So this is something that is spread through our visual language. If you saw Deadpool 2 and some of the promotional materials, you'll notice again, asymmetry, close-up, asymmetry specifically around the eyes. So we were able to actually analyze the progression of this through visual language, through its use in comic books. And we were able to trace it back to an image, single image, a single crystallizing experience that was done by David Bowie. And the image was the cover for his 1973 album, I believe, Aladdin Sane. So it was this image that was the initial kind of ground zero metaphor for this close-up eye asymmetry. And basically we combined ideas from developmental psychology in terms of critical periods of development, specifically for artists, where between the ages of 9 and 13, you are highly vulnerable and open as an artist to experiences that will set the trajectory of your creative endeavors. We combined that with psychology and aesthetics, which showed that for many artists, their prime productive period is in the ages of the early 30s is when they typically produce their most innovative and prolific work. We took a look at the idea of crystallizing experiences. We took a look at the idea of schemas and propagation through a shared system. And when you pointed this all together, all of it came down to say that if you were 9 to 13 years old when this album came out, then you would use this device in your prime productive period, which was in your early 30s. And if you look at when this device exploded, it exploded in the mid-90s when all the 9 and 13-year-olds at this time were comic book artists in their 30s, and then just spread it through that language. And if you want to see the details of that, we also published that in the Comics Grid Journal of Comic Scholarship. So I love this one especially because, number one, it's a published scientific paper on David Bowie and his contribution to comic book visual language. But it's also a peer-reviewed publication that has an F-bomb in it, which I think is pretty unique. So if you want that experience, go check it out. All right, continuing on. So that was my research projects. In terms of outreach and sort of moving towards kind of like the next stage in education, I just want to point out a couple of social media aspects that we have for this course. So I have a Twitter account. It is at @PlaidInsane. We're going to be using this as part of bonus point opportunities. So I do have a social media development program that I'll be instituting here for bonus points to help you develop your online presence. But if you are interested in seeing some of the work that my lab has done, we typically hashtag with either comic book scientist or too hard for soft science. But then also, as I go through my daily feed, if I see anything that I think might be particularly helpful for you in this course, or maybe particularly interesting for you in this course, if there's something about cognitive psychology that is cutting edge and I'm like, ooh, this might be great for my students, I'm going to hashtag that with PlaidInsane P335. So I'll bring up these hashtags a few times over the course of the semester, but just know that if you want to kind of see what's being done, what's the latest and greatest in cognitive psychology, you can look for that hashtag right there. And it also might include some helpful tips for how to succeed in university courses in general. So I got that aspect of my online presence. The other thing I want you to be sure of, to be aware of, is my YouTube channel, where I post lectures from the courses that I teach. So I set up, my laptop right there is set up, it's recording right now. This particular lecture, I will upload this to my YouTube channel. And the nice thing about this is that, number one, you can always go to that channel and review the lecture in question. So if you want to see something again, if you want to just go over it one more time, you can do that 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You have access to it. So if you're awake on Wednesday morning at 2 a.m. and you feel like watching a lecture, absolutely feel free. So we have that aspect to it. And then also, if you want to work ahead or maybe get a jump on one of your pre-tests, or for whatever reason, if you feel that you might benefit from seeing the material once before you come to class, just know that previous semesters of this particular course are also available. So if you kind of want a preview of what's coming up, you can go back to my last year course. I tweak my courses every single semester, but it will be mostly the same as what we're going to be going through this semester. So again, you can just use that in whatever ways you like to maximize your learning outcomes. All right, so the last thing I'm going to do, talking about myself, is this Stigma-free initiative that I'm part of. So this is this is an initiative from the National Alliance on Mental Health. And this was a commitment I made to living stigma-free and trying to promote a stigma-free society, especially for mental illness. So one of the best ways to remove stigma from mental illness is to just shine a light on it. So as part of that kind of public service announcement at this point in every course, I'd just like to let everybody know that I do battle depression. I was diagnosed with depression, went through therapy, and came out much, much better on the other end of it. But it is something that we need to talk about as a society, because too many people are hiding in the shadows, undiagnosed, scared to get help because of all this stigma surrounding mental health. So hopefully it helps to know that there are people out there who have gone through the same thing, myself included, and it is absolutely nothing to feel any stigma about. So to kind of let you see the benefits of removing this stigma and the benefits of getting help, this timeline here shows my career here at IUSB. So I started back in the fall of 2010. So that's starting it right there. And right about spring 2012, I was officially diagnosed with depression. I went to a therapist, and the therapist was like, yeah, you have depression. I would love to tell you that right about here is where I developed depression. And very quickly, I went to go get help. Right? Much like if you broke your arm, you wouldn't walk around with a broken arm for 3 months, lying to yourself that, no, I'm fine, this is great, I'll just be tough. You'd break your arm and say, you know what, I'm going to go to the hospital, probably right now. So I would love to tell you that that's what happened to me, but stigma kept me from seeking help. I was ashamed, I was embarrassed, and I tried to hide it as best as I could. So I lived for many years with this depression, and it was just undiagnosed. So I finally got the help that I needed. And it was a mixture of cognitive behavioral therapy and prescriptions. And I had my final prescription filled in spring of 2013. And once again, I would love to tell you that that was it. I was cured. It was all good. But recovery is an ongoing process. And you have good days, you got bad days. You take 2 steps forward, you take 1 step back. But thankfully, it is many more steps forward than it has been steps backwards. So to just kind of show you the benefits of getting therapy, of getting help. One thing that you might not be aware of is, as a psychologist, one of the ways that they measure your progress, they measure your productivity, is by taking a look at your publications. How much research do you actually put out there? So we have 2 types of publications, peer-reviewed and non-peer-reviewed. Basically they both count to see how productive you actually are. When I was in the thick of it, when I was in my worst kind of stages of depression, I was able to squeeze out 1 publication in about 2012. So nothing coming out here, but 1 publication in 2012. As the recovery continued, I had 3 publications in 2016. I had another 5 publications come out in 2017 in the spring. We need some more room. I had 1 more in spring of 2018. I had 4 more in 2019. I got 2 more that are right now submitted, waiting approval. So again, you can see, get the help that you need. It makes an absolute world of difference in terms of your quality of life, in terms of your effectiveness, and how much better is it to be fully operational and fully functional rather than walking around with this burden of depression just weighing you down constantly. So on that note, and as a final wrap up for this Living Stigma Free, I understand that not everybody might be ready to just come out and say, yes, I struggle with a mental illness. But one of the myths that is very harmful, and we need to talk about, and we need to make sure that people understand this, is the myth that you can overcome mental illness alone. That is just untrue. It's a lie, and it's a dangerous lie. But unfortunately, it's something that has been perpetuated in our society, right? So we kind of feel like, well, I'm suffering from this mental illness, but I'll just try harder. And I did this myself, right? Undiagnosed for many, many years. And you're just like, I'll try harder, or I'm just going to buck up, or I'm going to, suck it up and I'll do better. And just think of how ludicrous that would sound, again, with a broken arm, right? If somebody broke their arm and they went to somebody and said, hey, I have a broken arm, what do you think I should do? Nobody's going to tell them, well, just suck it up, go to work. You got a broken arm, big deal. I hurt my thumb, it's the same thing. It's not the same thing. A broken arm is very different. Mental illness is very different. So you can't do it alone. I'll just let you know, you cannot. Get that myth out of your head. And you need to get help. You need, if you think that you have a mental illness, you need to get help. And I'll say that one more time with the emphasis on the important word. If you think you have mental illness, if you even suspect it, you owe it to yourself to make sure that you go and ask somebody and go get help. And if you're still a little bit, still feeling a little bit of that stigma, I would highly recommend come to me. Let me be your first point of contact. I've gone through it. There will be absolutely no judgment because I was in the thick of it myself, so I would completely understand. But again, if you even suspect it, do yourself a favor, do it for yourself, do it for the people that love you. Make sure that you go get the help because it makes an absolute world of difference when you can get back to 100%. All right, enough about me. Let's do a bit of a cognitive warm-up. All right, so in this course, we're going to take a look at how your mind works, how your mind crunches information, processes that information to do the thoughts, to do the behavior that we are all capable of doing. So we're going to go through two examples here to kind of illustrate that idea and also just sort of get our mind, start flexing some of our cognitive muscles, shake off any dust that might have accumulated over the winter break. All right, so cognitive warm-up, 2 challenges, try to answer them as best as you can, and we'll begin with challenge number 1. So this is a 2-train challenge. You might remember these maybe from high school math. So here's the setup. 2 trains are 100 miles apart and both begin to travel directly towards each other. So they're 100 miles apart, start to travel directly towards each other. Train number 1 travels at a speed of 60 miles an hour. Train number 2 travels at a speed of 40 miles an hour. As soon as the trains begin to travel towards each other, a bird on train number 1 begins to fly directly toward train number 2 at 80 miles an hour. So as soon as this train begins, this bird takes off at 80 miles an hour. It's a fast bird. 80 miles an hour and starts traveling towards train number 2. As soon as the bird reaches train number 2, it immediately begins to travel back to train number 1 at 81 miles an hour. So as soon as it reaches number 2, it travels back to train number 1. And it repeats that. The bird continues to do this until the 2 trains collide. So that's the situation. The question is, how many miles has the bird flown? That is, what is the total distance of all the trips that the bird made? So when these 2 trains crash, what is the total distance that this bird has traveled since the beginning when they were 100 miles apart? That's the challenge. Off you go. All right, and I'll give you approximately, let's try this one for 4 minutes. All right, so that was 3 minutes, what we'll call it there. So just show of hands, how many of you were able to solve this? We got 1, maybe 2. Okay, so this is a very, very difficult problem to solve, or it's a very, very easy problem to solve. And the difference between whether it's hard or whether it's easy all has to do with how your mind actually represents the information that you are trying to process. So if you represent it in a certain way, it's near impossible. If you represent it in another way, it is immediately apparent. So let's take a look at how important representations are, because that's what we're going to take a look at a lot in this course. How does your mind represent information? How does it act on that information from that representation? So let's take a look at 2 ways of doing this. The first way, which if you didn't solve this, is probably the way that you did it, is representing this as a distance problem. So you start off with these 2 trains 100 miles apart. And this bird flies at 80 miles an hour, so this train is coming at 40 miles an hour. So their total speed, or their net speed towards each other, is 120 miles an hour. So you divide 100 miles by 120, and that'll give you how long the bird travels before it reaches this train. Then you can figure out how far this train traveled, how far this train traveled, what the new distance is, and then repeat that process again, and you have a smaller distance. And then you repeat that process again, and you get an even smaller distance. And then you repeat that process again, and you get an even smaller distance. And at some point, you're going to have to do differential calculus in order to get that final part where they're minuscule, and then you can have your solution. If you represented it this way, which is the typical intuitive way of representing this, then you're gonna be working on this for hours. So if you didn't finish this question, that's how you represented it. But what if you represent it in a different way? What if your mind starts with a different representation of this problem? What if you don't think of it as a distance problem, but you think of it as a time problem? So this train over here is traveling at 60 miles an hour. This train over here is traveling at 40 miles an hour. So their net speed is 100 miles an hour. They are 100 miles apart, so they are going to collide in 1 hour. So that bird has 1 hour to fly. How fast does the bird fly? 80 miles an hour. So how far is it going to go in a single hour? It's going to go 80 miles. So if you represent it as a time problem, that these two trains are going to collide in an hour, and this bird has 1 hour to fly, it's 30 seconds, and you're done. 80 miles is how far the bird is going to fly, and that is the difference that we're going to see in terms of how your mind represents things. So it's vastly important in psychology to understand how does our mind represent things. And as we're going to see in this example here, and in the way that our minds actually work, there are a variety of possible ways that our mind could represent things. And our job as psychologists is to figure out how do our minds really represent things. So when I asked, and I said, has anybody solved it? All the hands that went up, I knew as a psychologist, they represented the problem in this way. All the hands that stayed down, I knew as a psychologist, they represented the problem this way in their mind. And that's the kind of work that we're going to be doing this semester. All right, so that was challenge number 1. Challenge number 2 is coming up right now. So for challenge number 2, let's say that you have the following game of chance. All right, so let's say that you have an opportunity. You have been chosen to play a particular game of chance, a particular gambling game. So consider the following game of chance. You pay a fixed fee to enter, and then a fair coin is tossed repeatedly until a tail appears, and that ends the game. So you pay a certain amount of money to play this game, and the person takes out a fair coin, everything is above board, everything's on the up and up, and they'll flip the coin, and if it's heads, you continue in the game. You flip it again, if it's heads, you continue in the game. And you continue doing that until a tails appears, and that's when the game ends. And then you see how much money you've won, depending upon how many heads have flipped prior to the tails. So the pot starts at $1. That's the first pot. So if they flip a tail on that first time, you win $1. Not too bad. So the pot is $1, but it's doubled every single time a head appears. So if a head appears on the first flip, now the pot is $2. If it appears again, now it's $4. If it appears again, now it's $8. If then you get a tail, you walk out of there with $8. So you want more heads. The more heads, the better your pot is going to be. So if you thus you win $1 if a tail appears on the first toss, 2 if a head appears on the first toss and a tail on the second, 4 if a head appears on the first 2 tosses and a tail on the third, $8 if a head appears on the first 3 tosses and a tail on the fourth, etc., etc., etc. So the question now, 2 questions. Number 1, what would be a fair or rational price to pay for entering this game? So how much is this game actually worth playing? So we know at minimum it's worth $1 because you are guaranteed to walk out of there with $1. But you could walk out of there with more. So the first question is, how much would be a fair price or a rational price to pay this game? And then the second question is, how much do you feel you would pay to play this game? So if somebody said, we have an opportunity here and we're auctioning off this game, what would your highest bid be to have a chance to win $1 or maybe $2 or maybe $4 or maybe $8 or maybe $16 or maybe $32 depending upon how high you can go? What does your mind tell you would be a good price to pay for that game? So 2 questions. What do you think is a fair price? And what does your mind think would be a good price? And I'll give you a couple of minutes to try to figure that one out. All right, so has everybody written down or decided in their head how much they would be willing to pay for this game? All right, so make sure that you got that number. All right, so hands up if that number is $1 or higher. So everybody's hand is up, good, because you're guaranteed to walk out of there with $1, or you could win more. So it's rational in the long run. You're not going to lose any money to say, I'm willing to pay this for $1. That's a rational decision. All right, how many people had $2 or more? All right, so we lost a few. How many $5 or more? $10 or more? Anybody $20 or more? Okay, so nobody $20 or more. So we saw that a lot of people were willing to pay $1, a lot of people were willing to pay $2, some of you willing to pay $5, but we lost everybody by the time that we got to 20. So that's illustrating a very interesting thing about our minds and how we process information, because if you take a look at the rational, logical, mathematical solution to this game, it breaks down as follows. With a probability of 1/2, you're going to win $1. You got a 50-50 chance of winning $1, because if it comes up tails on that first toss, you're going to win $1. With a probability of 1/4, you're going to win $2, because if it comes up heads and then tails, which is going to happen 25% of the time, you're going to win $2. With a probability of 1/8, you're going to win $4, because heads, tails is going to come up 1/8 of the time. So if you continue on with that analysis, the expected value, what you can expect to win out of this game in the long run over multiple plays, what you can expect to win in this game is shown in this formula here, where for 50% chance you're going to win $1, 1/4 you're going to win 2, 1/8 you're going to win 4, 1/16 you're going to win 8. If you notice, you multiply this, you get 1/2. You multiply these two, you get 1/2. You multiply these two, you get 1/2. You multiply these two, you get 1/2. You multiply this all the way to the infinite number of coin tosses, they will all come out to 1/2, which means that your expected return on this game, once you add up all those halves, is infinity. This game makes sense rationally to play at any cost, because the return on this game is an infinite amount of money. So if somebody came up to you, and you were a rational, robotic thinking machine, and somebody came up to you and said, I have this game, are you willing to play it for $2? You would say, absolutely, $2? My payout is infinite. Of course I'm going to play this game. If they then said, well, what about $10? You'd be like, absolutely. What about 100? Sure. What about 1,000? It's a bargain. What about 100,000? Definitely, right? You're still going to, in the long run, make money. So the question is, and we're going to take a look at how psychology can answer this, if this is the rational thing to do, why did everybody drop out at less than $20? Right? Why did everybody make what on paper seems to be a completely irrational decision? And we're going to see that a lot of the things in cognitive psychology comes down to identifying what math and logic says is the right thing to do. And then we as psychologists take a look at what humans actually do, and then we try to figure out why is it that we do the things that we do. And incidentally, just as a sort of kind of foreshadowing of this, you're not irrational not to pay however, whatever the cost might be for this. You're not irrational to take out loans and mortgage your house and sell a kidney to play this game, right? You're not irrational if you don't want to do that, because one of the things that this doesn't take into account, that your mind took into account, is what available funds you have. So if you start taking into account all the pieces of information that our mind weighs, it does not make sense to pay an infinite amount of money to play this game if you don't have access to an infinite amount of money. And if you ask Bill Gates to play this game, sure, $100,000 a pop, no problem. If you ask you to play this game, $100,000 a pop, you better get 64 heads in a row this time. Otherwise, you're going to be bankrupt. So your mind took into account more than just the rules of the game. And again, that points psychologists towards what your mind is doing, and that's what cognitive psychology is going to be all about. All right, continuing on, course overview. So our course objectives for this is we are going to take a look at human cognition. How do we think? We're going to take a look at the major areas of cognition, attention, perception, memory, psycholinguistics, problem solving, and thinking. And it's all going to be using the basic framework of we're a information processing system. And we're going to take a look at what information is coming into this system. And we're going to take a look at what information or behavior comes out of the system. And we're going to analyze what comes in and what comes out to figure out what happened in between. And that is the essence of cognitive psychology. Knowing what goes in, measuring what comes out, and then coming up with theories and ideas to understand how do we get from here to here and to understand what is our mind actually doing. For the course, like all my other courses, I see some familiar faces in here, so you'll know this. I like to run my course like a research lab meeting. That means that all course content is open up to ideas and discussion. So you'll probably see a lot of things here that jogs ideas from your mind, that makes you remember things that either occurred to you or that you've seen elsewhere, maybe occurred to a friend. Bring up those ideas, bring up those discussions. Feel free to ask any questions. All you need to do is raise your hand. Go back to this slide, Dr. Yudicevic. I was just watching a TED talk that talked about this. Is that what we're covering today? And we'll have time in our courses to do that. I'm a firm believer in the no bad questions or bad ideas motto. So everybody probably has heard there's no bad questions except the one that's not asked. I'm a firm believer of that. But I do also know that there are wrong ideas. So there's no wrong questions, but there are definitely wrong ideas. And cognitive psychology exists as a part of psychology because we are horrible at knowing what our mind does. You think you have access to your mind. A lot of times we will sit there and go, why did I just do that? Let me think. Oh, there's the reason. It's not the reason. 95% of the time, it's not the reason. And that's why we have cognitive psychology. That's why we do experiments. Instead of just sitting in armchairs going, I wonder why I forgot that word on the list. Oh yeah, there's the reason. I saw it. You don't. You have very, very little knowledge or access to the inner workings of your mind. That's what this is all about. So you might think you know how cognition works, but you don't. I'll just flat out tell you right now, unless you take cognitive psychology, you don't have any idea. And as it turns out, most of our ideas are wrong. Most of the intuitions that people had, most of the ideas that, this must be the way that our minds work, completely wrong. But that's fine, that's just the way the science goes. So we're discovering new things about the mind all the time because we just don't have access to it. It's just something that we cannot access on our own, which is why we have psychology and systems in psychology to try to get at what's going on. All right, in terms of contact and Canvas, office right upstairs, 2163. Office hours are same day as class, actually starting half an hour after this class ends. So 1:15, feel free to drop by for the first office hour. 4 p.m. is the next one. In terms of other avenues of contact, there's my phone number. Forget it, don't use it. I still have blinking indicators that I have voicemails. And I also get transcripts through my emails of the voicemails that come in. And I should show you one of those transcripts when we get to language processing, because what the computer thinks was said and what was actually said is completely different things. And my name is butchered so often, so it just kind of shows you when we get to language just how special and difficult language actually is to accomplish. But bottom line, don't contact me like that. Contact me through Canvas messages, please, especially for course information. I am much better at my response time on Canvas messages than I am on my official emails. So it helps me keep the courses organized, so make sure that you're using that to contact for this course. In terms of this course, we use Canvas. So Canvas will have lecture slides available for you. So these slides right now that we're talking about are available in Canvas. I'll post a link to the playlist in Canvas so you have easy access there. And then any other information, Some of our assignments are going to be done through Canvas as well. So just make sure that you're aware of that and you're using Canvas to help you through this course. Speaking of, the resources that we're using, the required text, we're going to be using an online MindTap learning solution. So that can be online, that can be accessed through Canvas. So you go to modules here, and you'll see access online resources here, and you just click on that. It'll take you to the online resources. This course was part of the eText, IUSB eText program, so you should already have access to it. It was part of your tuition for this course. Everybody's ready to go. Everybody should be in there, so definitely give that a shot if you haven't already. Let me know if any issues come up. You definitely should not have to pay anything extra at this point. So just give that a test, because this is where the majority of what we're working on is going to be located. All right, in terms of where your grade is going to come from, what are we going to be doing? Kind of performance evaluation this semester. So we're going to have chapter pretests. These are pretests designed to get you ready for the class. So everything that I do is based on research in terms of how your mind and your brain actually works best. And one of those is through doing pretests. So in engaging with the material before you come to class, in actually learning about it and becoming familiar with it before you come to class, allows you then to use the class and maximize the benefits of attending class to kind of take you to the next level of understanding. So if you kind of set yourself a base, you'll get the most out of coming to class. And those pretests are there to encourage and reward you for completing the getting ready for class. The pretest, I'll post more information on this kind of to Canvas, but just so you know, the pretests have infinite attempts. So I don't expect you to know the material perfectly. That's why you come to class, is to help for me to help you understand the material more. But I do want you to get familiar with it. And also, I don't want it to impact your grade negatively. I wanted to use it as the tool that it is to get you prepared for class. So just be aware that there are infinite numbers of attempts to go through the pretest. They're going to be about 13 to 15 questions long. They're going to cover the chapter material in the order that you're going to read it, and go through it once. And if you are unsatisfied with your grade, it's to your benefit. Go through it again, try it again. If you're unsatisfied, try it again. If you're unsatisfied, keep going. It'll just help prepare your mind better for the class to come, so you can get the most out of the time that we spend here, our hour and 15 minutes together. All right, homework. There will also be homework assignments that we have, 15 in total. These are going to be homework assignments that are in the MindTap learning solution. So some of them will be accessible in the MindTap. Those are the class activities. Other ones will be accessible through Canvas. Those ones are going to be clearly identified on the syllabus. So right next to the homework assignment name, it's going to say Canvas. Those are indicating that those are the ones that you can access through Canvas. So for example, there are 2 quizzes that are available right now in Canvas. They're not quizzes, they're brief videos to just kind of get our minds right about where we're going this semester. So there's visual learning. There's going to be critical thinking assignments coming up later on. Again, if anything is not labeled, it's in MindTap. If it is labeled, it'll let you know where it is. So it's in Canvas, will be the other location. We're also going to be doing Cog Labs, so if you'd like to earn 7% towards your final grade, there are 13 Cog Labs. And these Cog Labs are your way of getting hands-on experience with the actual material that we're going to be discussing and engaging with. So it's one thing for me to tell you, oh, if you solve this train problem as a distance problem, it's really hard. But if you solve it as a time problem, it's really simple. You get a very low level of understanding if I just tell you about it. But going through the train problem and struggling to solve it as a distance problem, and then seeing how easy it was as a time problem, that gives you a deeper understanding. And that's what the Cog Labs are there for. So we're going to be doing the Cog Labs, and they'll illustrate certain phenomenon, some which you might not even believe when you read about them, but then when you go through it, you'll find out, whoa, that really is true. So it gives you that hands-on experience, and it'll help deepen your understanding of the concepts and things that we're looking at in this course. So those are available through my lab, and where you can find them, the chapters that you can find them, are also listed on the syllabus. All right, and then finally, in terms of quizzes, we're going to have end of chapter quizzes as well. So you do the pre-tests to get yourself ready to learn the material, and then you have an end of chapter quiz, which basically takes stock of what you have learned throughout that chapter. So the end of chapter quizzes, again, can be done as many times as you want. You can take as many attempts as you want, but I would encourage you to give it your best shot the first time through, and use that feedback on your first one to identify areas that you still might be struggling with, to identify areas that you might want to go back and review. So definitely these pre-tests and these post-tests, they're great as learning tools, and they're even, I would say they're even more useful if you struggle with them a little bit. So the pre-tests have actually been shown to increase learning incomes even if you struggle with the pre-test. The end of chapter quizzes will be great for just letting you know that, oh, this area you're really solid on, but this area you're still struggling with. So as tools to help you learn and to gauge your learning, they're great at identifying where you might need to work a little bit more to understand cognitive psychology. So struggling with pre-tests and post-tests, these end of chapter quizzes, they're great for learning. But I understand that struggling with pre-tests and end of chapter quizzes are not great for your GPA, which is why you have infinite attempts. So use the infinite attempts to make sure that you are getting the benefits of actually doing these and using them as a learning tool, but not as a detriment to your final grade in this course. So for example, if you do an end of chapter quiz and you get 50% on your end of chapter quiz, I would say take a look at that feedback and say, all right, I need to review this area and I need to review this area, and then I'll come back and I'll do the end of chapter quiz again until I get 100%. So again, use it to the best of your advantages. Use it as the tools that they're indicated to be. All right, and then the last one that I'll mention in terms of homework through the, or assignments through the MyLab, is this chapter mastery training. Now, chapter mastery training, you're going to learn very early why this works as well as it does. What this is, it's a interactive, customizing learning experience that takes a look at how you're doing in the mastery training and then changes it so that you can maximize your learning of the concepts. And it does a lot of practice, it goes through a lot of repetition. It's a sort of great system to help you learn the concepts and become very familiar with the concepts. So on the one hand, it's probably like things that you've experienced before in sort of the adaptive learning area. The one thing, though, that it enforces is this idea of distributed practice. So psychologists have found and have long known that if you are going to study for 4 hours, your mind will be much better at consolidating and remembering and understanding that information if you take that 4-hour study time and you split it up into 8 half-hour chunks across 8 separate days, rather than you do all 4 hours in one go. So 8 separate chunks across 8 separate days, that's distributed practice. You distribute practice across a wide area. That's what this mastery training does. It'll be distributed practice. You need to be aware of this because when you finish your first session of mastery training, the program will lock you out of the next session. Just want you to be aware of that. It'll literally put up a timer that says, come back in 6 hours, come back in 4 hours, come back in 8 hours. It'll vary depending upon where that adaptive learning algorithm is. But just be aware that you will be locked out. So definitely start the mastery training early. It's just a graded process that is bringing you towards mastery. So even if you're making mistakes at the beginning, don't worry about it. You can still earn 100% on this. But just know that at the end of each session, you do get locked out. So these are all going to be due the night before the exam that they're getting you prepared for. But if you save it for the night before, you will get the first session in and you will be locked out of the rest. And you'll only get 10%, 15% on that mastery training. So just be aware that it requires distributed practice. So kind of get used to it, make time, a little bit of time every single day, go to your mastery training, work through it, and be aware that you will be locked out for a time because, again, that's how your mind works best. All right, in terms of exams are going to be worth 25% towards your final grade. There's going to be a total of 4, and I'll have more to say about the exams in just a little bit. They're going to be multiple choice, non-cumulative for all of them, including the final exam. So use that information as you will. In terms of missing exams for makeup exams, also in terms of missing any sort of work, I understand that stuff happens. I understand that things get in the way. Maybe you get sick and you can't complete part of your mastery training. Maybe your boss schedules a emergency meeting and you need to go in during exam time. Maybe your child has a fever and you can't drop them off at daycare because they have that 24-hour rule. So you got to stay home with your child because you don't have any other child care opportunities. I know that stuff happens, and I want to be accommodating. I want to be fair in terms of that. So I'm very fair and accommodating in terms of what I will consider to be out of your control and be able to be excused work. But what I absolutely need is documented. It has to be documented. So if you are sick, make sure that you get a note from a doctor. Come here to the Health and Wellness Clinic. Get some sort of documentation that you were unable to, complete that mastery training because you were sick. If your boss is forcing you to go to an emergency meeting, there was an email that was sent out. Forward me that email. Take a screenshot, send it to me through Canvas. If your daycare does not allow your child to come in after 24 hours after having a fever, contact your daycare and just let them get them to send me a message that says that your child was not there on that day. Just some sort of documentation. So if it's extreme enough that you need to miss something in class or miss an exam, just have it in your mind that you need to get some sort of documentation. If your car breaks down, give me the tow bill and the repair bill. If you're snowed in, take a shot of your thing outside and send me a screenshot of the weather report for that day. I need something. It needs to be documented. So just bear that in mind for any missed work. If you did miss an exam, information on how to schedule a makeup is there in the syllabus. All right, class attendance. We had you all sign in today. I'm offering 10% for attending the classes. So if you'd like to earn that, please make sure that you attend all classes. I'll send out a sign-in sheet on every single class other than exam days. And straightforward 10% just for showing up and, after your pre-test, taking the time to level up your learning. All right, and then the last sort of opportunities for points, I'm going to have 2 bonus point opportunities that are available. Number 1 is I have this social media professional development program that I like to do in my courses. So some of you have already gone through that. I keep tweaking it every single semester. Some of you will be brand new to this. But the reality of our world right now is that you do need to have a social media presence in order to be a professional. So if you want to be a professional psychologist, whatever you want to get into, if you want to maximize your chances of getting into grad school, some sort of social media presence is required and it needs to be professional. So we're going to go through a sort of step-by-step guide in how to develop that social media presence. And this will be bonus. So I understand if people have reasons that they might not want to get involved. It's not part of the course. It's bonus points in addition. And it will drop 6% of your lowest scores from any assignment or combinations of assignments. So it can drop a mind tap, it can drop a combination of pre-tests and post-tests, and whatever it is at your lowest scores, I'll drop up to 6%, depending upon how you're doing the social media professional development. So we'll have more information on that in the coming weeks. And then the second opportunity is suggestions in the Innovations Initiative. So I started this last semester and it was great. I'm always looking for ways to make this course better, and one of the best ways to find out how to better make a product like a course is to get feedback from the people that are actually using the product, which is you guys. So what I'm going to do is every 2 weeks, I think, I'm going to put a link to a survey where you can make any suggestions, any sort of innovations that you might have for this course. So if you have a wild and crazy idea, you know, something that's like, I think it would be great if the professor did the entire course in falsetto, because I heard that high-pitched voices are just easier to code. So it'd be great if he did the whole course like this. Make that suggestion, right? Put it in there, and what we'll do is every single 2 weeks, I will post a survey for those suggestions, and we'll have everybody vote on the top suggestion. And whoever gets the top suggestion will earn points towards this bonus points, and you can earn up to 7% dropping of your lowest grades from the score. So we'll have more about that in this class. It will be completely anonymous. So I have a system where you can make anonymous suggestions and yet at the same time gain credit for those suggestions if they are the top ones. So you can be very honest, you can be very open. I appreciated it. It was a gold mine last time in terms of new ideas for new things in the course. So we'll talk more about that in the coming weeks as I start to roll out those surveys. All right, almost done. In terms of grading, there is the grading breakdown for grades in this course. That's pretty standard. In terms of where your grades come from, I do have a little, something that's much different in my course from others that you might be familiar with. So in terms of pre-test, homework, Cog Labs, end of chapter, post-test, chapter mastery training, that's pretty straightforward. There's your breakdown right there. What's a little bit different in my courses is how the exams are broken down. So I have a sliding scale. I call it the sliding scale of forgiveness. And the way that this works is that your best exam is going to be worth the most towards your final grade. Your worst exam is going to be worth the least towards your final grade. And this is just kind of building forgiveness. If we come across a section of cognitive psychology that just doesn't make sense to you, so I'm a guy, I'm a perception person. The perception section made complete sense to me when I was an undergrad. I'm not a language person. The language section, I was a little bit lost. I struggled with the language section a bit. Just to make sure that we have that kind of built-in forgiveness, just know that the exam that you do the worst on is going to be worth the least for your final grade. The exam that you do the best on is going to be worth the most. So what this means is that even if you fail your first exam, even if you only get 50% on your first exam, you're only going to lose 2% and you can still get an A+ in this course. So just know that that is built in there for that kind of sliding scale of forgiveness. Class attendance is worth 10%. That's how important I think it is to show up and be present. And that total is 100%. So in terms of accommodations for religious observances, students with disabilities, academic conduct, and what you should know, check the syllabus. In terms of electronic devices, feel free to use electronic devices. Have your cell phones out, absolutely. However, please do not communicate in class using your devices. So if you need to answer a text, if you need to answer a phone call, feel free to just step out the door. You don't even have to put up your hand or anything. Just kind of get up, go take care of your business, and come on back. Completely understand that those situations arise. But please do not do it in class because it does get distracting and takes away from the learning experience of your fellow students. All right. The last thing that I'll mention, the course schedule is available right now. The syllabus is available on Canvas. You can see that for the next class. We got nothing due for the next class. So I would say get into MindTap, start poking around, start exploring it a little bit. When things are due, they will be in red on the syllabus as well as listed in my lab. But I do want to point out that they are due at midnight the day before we meet for classes. So we're meeting on a Tuesday. The work for that day is due Monday by 11:59 p.m. The syllabus also lists January 22nd is week 2, class number 1. That's the way that the lecture slides are going to be coded. That's the way that the YouTube videos are going to be coded to allow you to find it easy access. And then the last thing is that anything that's not labeled such as pretest number 4, such as chapter 1 activity, Ebbinghouse's forgetting curve. These are available in my lab. So anything that's not labeled is in my lab. The Cog Labs, they're distributed across different chapters. It'll let you know where that Cog Lab is and where you can access it in my lab. So Cog Lab for change detection, that is in chapter 4. Anything that is not in my lab will have this little parentheses before that lets you know where it is. So this video learning, your orientation to MindTap, which allows you to kind of, gives you an overview of how the system works. And this other video learning homework assignment, How You Can Fill Your Potential by Carol Dweck. These two are available in Canvas, and I'll let you know. It's in Canvas, it's in quizzes, that's where you can find it. So that is your Intro to Cognitive Psychology for the course. Any final questions before we wrap it up for today? All right, so welcome to the course, and we will start in next class with a continuing look at sort of the foundations of cognitive psychology. You don't have anything to do to prepare for next class, but I do highly recommend make sure that your MindTap access through Canvas is working and just start poking around, checking things out, and taking a look at what this course has to offer. Other than that, we are done for today.